Hello, I'm Linda Green, and welcome back to Know the Signs, as well as Christ-centered empowerment for families. And today we're going to pick up where we left off last week. Last week we talked about, it was more of an introduction into economic abuse. So we're going to pick up right here and just call it part two of how emotional abuse impacts economic security. I want to share with you where this information is coming from because I think it's important to know this. It's coming from a few different sources. One is Dreams Deferred, which was a survey that was completed in 2018, where 164 survivors were surveyed in 11 states. And one of the things they had in common outside of the domestic violence that they had experienced was the fact that they'd all received some form of a housing subsidy from a particular agency, nonprofit or government agency, or federal funding, I guess, as well as the National Network to End Domestic Violence and the CDC, Center of Disease Control. I want to start this by sharing the same quote that I shared last week, because I think it's so important to hold on to this, and that is exactly what is emotional abuse and what it does. So emotional abuse aims to diminish the dignity and identity and self-worth of the individual on the receiving end of that. You hear that? It aims to diminish the dignity, identity, and self-worth of the individual who's experiencing the emotional abuse. Okay. So I also want to make sure I define domestic violence because I think that's important too. So domestic violence is defined as a pattern of behaviors played out in a cycle designed to gain and maintain power and control over another individual. Okay, and that's really what makes it so not normal marital conflict. Oftentimes when people share a story or something that's going on in their marriage, it's easy to say, well, that's just normal married stuff. Well, if you listen closely, you'll discover that not necessarily. And this is a perfect plug for me to make right now for the training that Vincent and I do called Know the Signs. And that's a 3-hour training. We'll be doing it again this spring. I'll let you know for sure when. But we focus on the 3 R's: how to recognize, respond, and refer when someone you know and love that you believe may be experiencing domestic violence. So this training is not for the person experiencing the abuse or for the perpetrator, the one who is indeed abusive. This training is designed for, I say, the rest of us, for those of us who are not in an abusive relationship, because this is indeed it's a worldwide problem. This is not a woman's problem. Certainly our country has struggled tremendously, as all across the world. I said this before, I think in the previous, in part one, in the orientation, that there are some, I think it's like 64% of all mass shootings in this country have been linked to domestic violence. Okay, so economic abuse, that's what we're talking about, right? So economic abuse is the most common reason survivors stay in abusive relationships. And I wanted to say that right up front because so often I think that we have either heard it or we may have even said it ourselves. Oh, why doesn't she just leave? Or why doesn't he just leave? Because men can experience intimate partner violence, domestic violence, just like women can. It takes on many forms, this economic abuse does. It can be anything from preventing the survivor from accessing funding or coerced debt and so much more. And we're gonna get into it. And as I said before, it shows up in like anywhere between 98 and 100% of all relationships where there is indeed domestic violence. Okay, so this is why you think about why this economic abuse, why it really matters, because survivors of economic abuse, they're unable to leave an abusive relationship, or they may be forced to return to an abusive relationship for the economic reasons. I believe I shared, like here in Oregon, in Multnomah County particularly, this last statistic I read on the homelessness within our city. It's probably across the country, but some 75% of the women who are homeless, they're linked to also homelessness has been caused by the domestic violence. Survivors often are coerced, hard name of that word, they're coerced to make massive decisions, financial decisions that they otherwise would not make due to the threats that they're under, right? Due to being coerced into taking out loans and all of the like, and we'll get to that. There's this area of employment-related abuse. This is where someone is literally preventing someone else from gaining employment. I once had a survivor share a story with me many years ago, how her husband told her, oh yeah, you can get a job, but you have to go to work after I leave for work, whatever time that was going to be. And you have to be home before I come home from work. And dinner has to be on the table when I get home from work. And he even lined out an area, a demographic area of where she could go to work. So for her, by the time he put all those stipulations in place, it made it next to impossible for her to locate employment. So there's all kinds of ways that this can happen. It's also sabotaging survivors' employment. And that's anything from making a lot of phone calls on her job to actually showing up on her job. I've also had survivors share with me on more than one occasion how their husband or boyfriend would show up at their place of employment, get them to come out of the office and just berate them right there in the hallway or right there in plain view of their coworkers are witnessing this. It's very difficult to keep a job when that's going on, right? And of course, even demanding the survivor quit their job. Sometimes this is done because, oh, no, you're pregnant. We want you to stay home and take care of the baby. That's going to be best for the baby. I'm not saying it's not best for the baby, but what is the motivation behind that, right? What's going on with that? Because we know a lot of women go to work and have childcare, and the kids turn out great, and everything works out fine. What we're talking about when the motive behind it is to see to it that that survivor is placed in a position where she now must stay home, and over a period of time, she's losing that edge and something that she desires to do, which is to be productive in a career as well as a mom, right? I talked about preventing survivor from even looking for work. And this idea of preventing survivor from being able to access funding, deciding how much money a person can receive, or maybe even determining that she or he cannot access their credit card, their bank account, don't access to a credit card or a debit card, or forcing them to sign loan documents. They may have no desire at all to take out a loan. Yet and still, they are coerced into doing that, whether it be credit cards or whether it be personal loans, right? And then even so far as to not have access to the ATM. So therefore now we have someone who has said to you, I'm going to take care of all the money. I'm going to keep the debit cards. I'm going to keep all the credit cards. They're going to be in my possession. And I will let you know when and how you can use this, or when and how you can ever access the funding at all. And chances are you're not going to, because that person is going to control all of it. So this non-consensual credit-related transactions, right? I kind of talked about this already, but this is where there's coerced debt, and it destroys the survivor's credit rating, right? Making it very difficult for him or her, right, to obtain loans in the future, or to even be able to rent property in the future, right? Because your credit is so damaged. Now, when you go to apply for, whether you're going to apply for a loan or whether you're going to try to lease an apartment, you're unable to do it because your credit is so damaged because of the coerced debt that the survivor has experienced, right? I talked about even force the survivor to sign these financial documents. That's really big, or even to threaten them. Threats of physical force or physical violence can be threatened too, in order to prevent survivor from going forward and being able to access funds or being able to take out credit, refinancing a mortgage maybe. And also another thing that's quite common is for the person using power and control. It's common for that individual to make sure their name is on like the mortgage, or their name is on the lease, or their name is on the auto loan, right? Keeping their name on everything. So therefore, if the survivor were to choose to leave, then once again, they're leaving with nothing, right? And other forms of economic abuse are also just withholding the necessities, literally withholding the basic necessities, such as food, clothing, shelter, personal hygiene products, even medication. All of this are forms of economic abuse. Here's another one super common, is refusing to pay the court-ordered child support or spousal support. Really, really common. Stealing and destroying survivors' belongings, right? Requiring justification for every dime that's ever spent, right? Repeatedly filing, when it comes to the custody piece, repeatedly filing costly lawsuits over child custody, racking up attorney fees over and over and over again is another form of economic abuse. And here are just some real quick quick statistics on economic abuse. So I think we've said this already, but between 94 and 99% of all survivors have experienced economic abuse, because it's all wrapped in there. There was a survey done by the Corporate Alliance to End Intimate Partner Violence, and they found that a number of the respondents to this particular survey they did, 64% reported their abuse impacted their ability to work. 40% reported their abuser harassed them via the phone and in person. Okay? And from the demographic background of participants in this particular survey, I want to share this with you. And I believe this is from the National Network to End Domestic Violence. So 97% of those surveyed were women. 71% were between the ages of 25 and 45. The average age of someone experiencing this, a part of the survey that experienced economic abuse, the average age was 38. 6% self-identified as gay, lesbian, or bisexual. 90% identified as heterosexual. And 4% declined to answer. These surveys are always interesting, because I think we can all say, I wonder how accurate that is. Well, this is a survey, and I tend to lean into the accuracy, and also more than anything, the accuracy and the numbers are probably lower than what they really are, because not everyone reports instances of domestic violence, right? They just don't. This is way too embarrassing. There's so much shame that's wrapped up in this. You don't want anyone to know, right? Whether it's emotional, whether it's physical, whether it's spiritual, right? Whether it's property, there's so many different types of abuse. So as another part of this, so the participants' history, their experience, I should say, with intimate partner violence. This is what they said out of that same particular survey. 87% repeatedly said they were called names, they were insulted by their partner. 87%. Another 85% said they received threats, anger, and they were made to feel frightened, right, as they're being coerced and intimidated and made to basically adhere to whatever their abuser was saying they had to do around those area of finances. 85% said they physically had been hurt, physically harmed. 77% said they tried to control the financial decisions and resources. So once again, they're saying 77% of that number of folks that were surveyed or part of this survey. 68% said they were stalked. Right? Another 54% said they were threatened, they were coerced, that they were forced to have sexual acts that they weren't, something they did not want to do. Right? So there's so much to this economic abuse and how emotional abuse impacts economic security, because that's all wrapped up together. But this time, abusers are using money as a source of it. So I know this is a lot, you guys, and I always say whenever I start talking about this, I feel like I'm all over the place, because, gosh, domestic violence, intimate partner violence, it is so incredibly insidious. It is it's very hard to, because it could be this, it could be that, but the one thing we know for sure is that many women and many men, their lives and their emotional stability is being damaged, in some cases severely, right? Experiencing this thing called domestic violence. So thank you for popping in. I look forward to seeing you again next week, and we'll just see what that topic's going to be. I don't know whether this is going to be a part 3 or not. We shall see, because I keep having people asking me over and over again, they want to know more about how they can prevent it. So there might be a whole, I have to produce something a little different than how we prevent our friends, family, or loved ones from falling into abusive relationships, and what we can do to what we can do to stop it before it starts more than anything. I think that's what we all, the hope and the desire is for it to stop before it ever gets started. So once again, thank you so much for joining me. I'm Linda Green, Know the Signs, and we just spent the last 15 minutes talking about how economic abuse, how emotional abuse impacts economic security. Thank you. See you next week.